What makes a murder stand out? People taking life has been happening since people learned to walk and then choosing to take life for whatever reason. Murder still takes place today. Many cases grab the zeitgeist of the news with people's attention, and much of it goes under the radar. Terrible crimes that you've never even heard of and didn't even know that they were happening all around you. Looking back in time with history of murders, the style has changed somewhat from the 90s till now. As technology has damaged the hunt for killers to grab and go, the end remains the same, but the details look different today. It's truly sad and amazing how many young women have been picked up in cars and never let loose alive. Many killers you know of that still grab attention today, and many you might have never even seen their face, but they've done terrible things too. There's many victims that are still in the woods today, buried, lying next to a creek, or under someone's home, buried away from sight. But sadly, the world we live in allows an overflowing amount of sad stories that can ruin your day. These are 3 different cases of murder that happened and need to be remembered for their gruesome nature of just how terrible people can be to each other. In the 70s, in the state of Ohio, 2 little girls were born, just 2 years apart. Their names were Michelle and Christy. They were loved and raised on a dairy farm. Their parents were Hal and Joan Rogers. They all lived in Wilshire, Ohio. The girls didn't have a huge life of traveling or even a lavish lifestyle. It was just small town living, going to school, coming home, working on their farm. Really the plot of most movies that love the small town feeling. They raised the girls with morals and values, but the family had really never been anywhere, especially the girls. Joan, the mother, not only worked on the farm, but she worked right out of state too, at a factory job. But Joan wanted a vacation. She wanted to have time with her girls, and the father, Hal, thought it best that he stay behind and tend to the farm. So a trip to Florida was set for the girls, all 3 of them. They loaded up, said goodbye to their father, and pulled out of their driveway on May 6, 1989. They could have never imagined what was going to happen to them when they left their home. Joan was 36 years old, Michelle was 17, and Christy was 14. They began making their way down to Florida, stopping in Georgia. They found a hotel the first night and woke up the next morning driving to Florida and starting their trip, enjoying themselves. They send postcards to their friends and loved ones, telling them about the amazing trip they're having. They're having the time of their life. June 1st was the day that they would all be murdered. On that day, the girls left Orlando to drive to Tampa. But this is where the story loses details from phone calls back home, and it's just simply evidence at this point with what happened that will help the story be told. They left Busch Gardens that day, trying to get back to their hotel, but becoming lost in the process. They pulled over to a parking lot and started to look at a map. This is simply where we know evil finds them. It's believed that the girls asked, or were simply asked by this man, for their help. This is Oba Chandler. Sadly for the 3 girls, they don't know that Oba is a psychopath and is an active killer with no remorse. It seems that the girls have found the needle in the haystack of bad situations. Oba gives the girls directions, even on one piece of paper his own handwriting, which in the end will be the bloody glove that comes back to haunt him. We know that he offers to take the girls out that night on his boat, saying that he'll show them the sunset and sightsee. He tells them about a boat launch that just happens to be 1 mile from their hotel and where he lives. For whatever reason, Joan believes Oba, and it will lead to a horrific story for all 3 of them. The girls head over to the hotel and get ready, having a late dinner. They also take pictures in those last hours. These are the very last moments of the Roger girls alive, just hours before their horrific death. They spend these little last moments together, right in their hotel room, laughing, watching TV, fixing their hair, But then it's time to go. Driving to their own death, they leave the room and head over to the boat ramp, taking less than 10 minutes. Many people believe that Oba was in the room in these last moments, but the family members disagree with this, saying there's no way that they would have let him in the hotel room. It wouldn't have fit the character of the girls. But you can see what looks to be two different arms that are depicted. So whether this is Oba taking a picture of all three of the girls, or it's just a moment in time the picture caught a weird image. We know that the girls arrive at the boat ramp a little after 8:30. This picture is taken on the camera. It's the last one ever taken. They don't know who took it, but it shows the sunset, their last sunset they see. They park their car and jump out and head over to Oba, seeing him on his boat. At this point, this is what is believed to have happened. Oba drives out to the bay, away from sight and sound. Somewhere in that time frame, we never know if the girls really got to see their last sunset over the ocean. But Oba pulls out some sort of weapon, holds them hostage, and ties them up one by one, putting their hands behind their back, tying their feet up together, and then putting duct tape over their mouths. He then assaults them one by one. Mother watches daughter, daughter watches mother, and sister watches sister. The sounds must have been beyond heartbreaking, sounds from the pure pits of hell, but the cruelty continues. He then ties a rope around each of their necks, leading to a cinder block they each have. He left their eyes on duct tape, more than likely on purpose, so they would be more horrified, giving him satisfaction as the fear built. He then picks them up, one at a time, puts them on the edge of the boat, and throws all three of them one by one into the ocean. They were still alive. The girls fall all the way to the dark depths of the ocean by themselves and drown with water racing through their nostrils. It's amazing how heartless a human can be. It just doesn't seem real that it could happen like that. Oba then sits down and he calls his wife from his boat, saying that he was having motor problems, but that he'll get home soon. Don't wait up for him. The girls' bodies are found 3 days later, almost 30 miles away from the bay that they parked their car. They float to the top of the water from the gases releasing in their body. As the call comes into the police from people finding the bodies, soon all three of the girls are found. Police truly can't believe what they're seeing. There's no privacy in the case whatsoever. It's out in the open for everyone. They pull the girls out one by one. The story blows up throughout the local stations. The girls are taken for autopsies and dentals are pulled. For a moment, they have no idea who these women are. Police are baffled. After 3 days, the girls, not returning home, the father, Hal, contacts the police because he's had no contact with his family. Soon 2 and 2 are put together. Hal gives permission for dental records, and the girls are identified. Their car is soon found, where the biggest piece of evidence is also laying in it. There are 2 pieces of paper with handwriting on them, but different handwriting for each of them. The one piece of handwriting is Joan's, where you can see that she's wrote down directions to a boat launch and information on the boat itself. The other one is on a brochure, directions on how to get to the girls' hotel, and on that brochure, it was Oba's handwriting, also along with palm prints. With police having no leads, no real evidence at that time, they take the handwriting from the mysterious person on the brochure and post it on a bulletin board, asking people, do they recognize this handwriting? And eventually, that's what does it. One of the sickest parts about what happened to the girls is the premeditation that went into their murder. Oba prepping in those small hours he had at his home, knowing exactly what he was going to do that night. No second thought, but excited to destroy a whole family. But how the story would wrap up, Oba, who owned his own construction company and always writing checks or bills for work that had been done, had a customer of his, and with the signs being flooded through the area in Florida and on TV, a lady recognized the handwriting that Oba had written on the brochure that was in the Rogers car. In September of 1992, Oba, who was connected to many other terrible crimes on women that have been assaulted or have just disappeared while in his presence, is sentenced to death for the murders of the Roger girls. But Oba would sit in prison for 2 decades, pleading his innocence and still being questioned by authorities with other murders. And on November 15th of 2011, Oba Chandler is sent to death by lethal injection. The father and husband of the Roger girls didn't go to the execution. Instead, he stayed home, the same farm that he had been at, where he raised his girls, married to his new wife. It's a sad story that really has no good ending. Sadly for children, having safety in their own home doesn't always happen. There's hundreds of stories of mothers and fathers taking the lives of their own child. It seems to be a never-ending story, sadly. But there is one that took the nation by surprise from news medias: the awful story of the Yates family.
The new mother?
Hello.
Mother for the 5th time?
Uh-huh.
Everybody say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye to the camera.
Bye.
You can look at the story one or two ways. It can discuss you with horror, in which it should, or see it in a small light. Once upon a time, this was a beautiful family for a short time. Strong bonds with little boys that loved each other and their new little baby sister. The story is longer than just a few minutes it took to end in a bathroom. The Yates family in reality was just like your family, but behind closed doors, there were elements unfolding. The Yates started like most, got married, started having children. People that knew them and were around them considered them strong people that were a pillar in their faith and love. But as time slipped in, Andrea lost who and what she was to her boys. It's no secret a woman making and giving birth is a hard element for any of them. But to do this 5 times in a short time is what many doctors call dangerous. The physical aspect is one thing, but to the mind, it's a whole nother element. When you talk about postpartum layering itself from the previous child's that she was still trying to get over the postpartum of, it becomes dangerous. And that's simply what started to happen to Andrea. Postpartum is a real element that mothers go through while raising a child or multiple children, working a job or staying home, but their brain is trying to reboot itself as well. But Andrea had found herself in a place called postpartum psychosis, to where she wasn't who she really was in the end. Sweet, loving, excited about the future. In the beginning, when they started having children, Rusty and Andrea were strong in their faith. They built their life on the foundation of being Christian evangelists, Bibles throughout the house, going to church, and with that, they wanted as many children as they could have, and did nothing to stop it. With the start of their first child in February of 1994, the fuse was set to explode in 7 years, and in those 7 years, Andrea would have birth 5 times to 5 beautiful children. Andrea herself was a nurse for almost 10 years before her first child was born, but giving it up to raise her children and stay home. From 1994 to 1999 was where Andrea would spend her days and nights raising children, and for most of that time span was pregnant for most of it and trying to heal from the last birth, just in a circle of life that was never ending. But in the middle of 1999, elements started to show themselves of what damage had been done. Rusty speaks of this time where his life starts to fall apart, and one of the first moments that he speaks of, he says in 99, he came home to find Andrea curled up, shaking, and gnawing on her fingertips. Rusty calmed her down as much as he could, praying and talking with her, but the next day, she tried to harm herself with pills, and nearly succeeded. She was sent to the hospital and soon prescribed more pills. Pills for pills was the cure. Rusty says it was never the same after this. He said that Andrea would beg him to just let her go, that she didn't want to be there anymore. She didn't want to breathe anymore. She would scream, hold knives to her neck, and be hospitalized a few more times. And once again, more pills, different pills, tossed at the problem. Andrea was having a nervous breakdown more times in a week that Rusty could keep track of. In the middle of 1999, a doctor would first diagnose Andrea with postpartum psychosis. But with this, Rusty is still not understanding that Andrea is a danger to not only to herself, but people around her too. It's so bad that a doctor in private would pull Rusty aside in 1999, telling him that he needs to keep an eye on her at all times, and for no reason whatsoever to have any more children, and be very careful with it. That Andrea was not in a mental space to conceive any more children, and that she needed time to heal while still raising children and just trying to breathe herself. But the last time Andrea was in the hospital for trying to harm herself, she would be let go, and 7 weeks later, Rusty would impregnate her once again. From the end of 1999, going into 2001, everything seemed to be running as smooth as it could until March of 2021. When Andrea's father would pass away, Andrea herself fell apart. She stopped taking medication, stopped feeding her baby. She just sat and looked at the wall. On May 3rd of 2001, Andrea goes home from the hospital. In that same week, Andrea is home with the children, by herself. She fills the family bathtub with water right around noon, but then she walked away. She sat and thought about taking the children's lives that day, but she decided against it for whatever reason. Rusty comes home and finds the bathtub full of water, thinking Andrea was going to harm herself. The next day, she was taken to the hospital for her checkup. Andrea was in such bad shape at the doctor's office that he hospitalized her due to fear of her harming herself. She would later tell the police that day, when she filled the bathtub up, she was going to harm the children then, but didn't go through with it. But just weeks later, it would all change. This is the last picture of the family together, all of them. Just weeks, days, and hours before they're all ripped apart from each other. On June 20th of 2001, in their home in Texas, Andrea would find herself alone with the children. Rusty, who had been told by the doctor multiple times to not leave her alone with the children, would break that promise. Rusty had made contact with his mother that morning, making sure she was still to arrive around 10:30 that day to help Andrea. It's confirmed. Rusty tells everyone goodbye and leaves for work at 8:30 a.m. It's just Andrea alone with the children. She immediately goes into her plan. She makes cereal for the older boys. She sets them at the dinner table, keeping them busy. She then walks to the back bathroom, fills the tub up with 9 inches of water, of cold water. She would then go to her baby, Mary, take her to the bathtub, and hold her under. She left Mary floating in the tub. She walks back into the kitchen where the boys are, grabbing the youngest first, one by one, taking them to the bathtub, picking them up, setting them in the tub, and holding their heads under water. Andrea finally brings in her oldest son. He escapes from her, but she chases him down, dragging him back to the tub. He knew what was going to happen at just 7 years old. In the end, with just 30 minutes it took to end the lives of all of her children that took 7 years to build, they're gone. She puts them in her and Rusty's bed, side by side. Andrea at that moment is satisfied, believing she's done the right thing. She picks up the house phone and calls the police. Right after that, she would call Rusty and tell him to come home. When Andrea is arrested, she told her doctor that her children wouldn't grow up to be righteous. It's obvious that Andrea is disconnected from reality and fully not understanding the gravity of what she's done or who she was even 2 years ago. She doesn't hide anything. She calmly tells every single detail, minute by minute. There's much more that can be said about this story, but Andrea is sent to the psych ward, spending the rest of her life there, even though after 40 years, she has the possibility to be released. Rusty remarried after some time, having one more child, a son, but soon having a divorce with his new wife as well. What Andrea did is beyond horrific, but there is a case to be made that Andrea was the first victim in this story, to where she was made to become the villain. A broken mind and religious radical thoughts construed, making her a vicious killer for a moment. She should have had a break from having children, taken time for herself. It has no good happy ever after ending. It just has a moment in some reality where brothers are with each other, playing and holding with their baby sister together forever. There's a story inside of a story from many years ago, but one nonetheless that should never be forgotten, of a special person that was only 12 years old. Her death was horrific and vicious, but it would also become somewhat of a sacrifice so others could be saved, making her a hero. This is the murder of Kimberly Leach.
The badly decomposed body of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach of Lake City, Florida was found under a piece of tin in an old hog shed. We have also learned that the girl's body was partially clothed. The rest of her clothing was found nearby.
On February 9th, 1978, the first part of the story would unfold. It was a cold and rainy day. 12-year-old Kimberly would essentially have a normal day, taking the bus to school, which was Lake City Junior High. That morning, things were somewhat different at the home. Everyone would get up. Kimberly's father would go to work, but Kimberly's mother, who was a hairdresser, would stay home that day. Kim that day wore suspenders with a football jersey with her name on the back of it. Kimberly's cheerful and her normal self. She has no idea that she's about to be kidnapped by the world's most vicious and notorious serial killer in history to this day. On that day in 1978, Ted Bundy would just randomly drive up to Kimberly's school looking for an opportunity. Ted was on the run in Florida. The FBI was looking for him, plastering his face and name on newspapers and nightly TV news stations. Days before Ted would find Kimberly, he had broken into sorority houses, murdering young girls right in their bed. At Florida State College, it made national news, and when it happened, feds were already thinking it could be Ted. At this point in Ted's story, it's the end of his freedom. He's out of his mind. We still don't have a clear picture of Ted in these last days, with minute by minute. We do know that Ted tried taking a young girl just the day before taking Kimberly. He tried taking a girl in a Kmart parking lot in Florida. Luckily, the girl's brother would walk up on Ted, talking to her, trying to lure her in a van that Ted had stolen from Florida State College. Ted had no plan. He knew that every agency was looking for him. He was simply just driving around, stealing what he needed, but still looking for opportunities that presented themselves. His addiction that he said he couldn't control was still there, wanting to be fed. Also, the day before Ted took Kim, he bought with a stolen credit card a very large hunting knife, which was rare for Ted to have on him, a real weapon. There's really no other moments in Ted's history with murdering women where he used a knife or a gun, so this was rare, but the knife would come up again, sadly. We know that Ted drove up to the school that day, parking across the street on the side of the road, almost like he was trying to be stopped. He just didn't care. He parked his van on the berm of the road. He sat there in the driver's seat, just looking, for hours. We know this because where the van was parked and spotted by people that saw it, there was almost a pack of cigarettes sitting there on the ground piled up that Ted smoked one by one as he was watching the school, but later being found and used as evidence later on in the case. We really don't have a time of when he got there, how long, who else he talked to, but he knew there was young girls in the school and had been watching them walk back and forth from classrooms and buildings. He knew that this was going to be a grab and go, to not waste time. Ted was wearing a suit jacket with dress pants and black reading glasses. He even grew a mustache, looking well put together as usual. He combed his hair, simply just looking like a parent, someone with responsibilities. He didn't look crazy. He didn't look out of place. You could even say he almost looked like a teacher. The exact time Kimberly was taken isn't known, but we do know it was before 10 a.m. Kimberly was in the gym, apart from her school building. While she was in her gym class, she remembered that she left her purse in her classroom, so she told her friend that she needed to go back and get her purse from where she just was in her classroom. From door to door, from the gym to the back door of the school, it was less than 300 feet. It's believed that Ted saw Kimberly at this moment. He got out of his van, walked over to the door where Kimberly had just went into the school, and waited for her, just hoping she would come back out. And she did. Kimberly comes out of the door, and Ted approached her. It's not exactly known how Ted lured her to the van, but it had to be peacefully, because no one heard screaming and she was seen walking with a man to a white van that fit Ted's description. It's believed that Ted told Kimberly that he was a friend of the family and that she needed to come with him immediately. Years before Ted confessed to murders, he would talk about serial killers and murders to investigators and his own crimes that he hadn't confessed to, but he would talk about it in the third person. Ted had made a remark about Kimberly, saying that the killer more than likely found her and told her that something was going on with her family and that she needed to come with him. So this is believed to be Ted admitting to what he told Kimberly. You have to understand that this was a huge distance, where Ted had to walk Kimberly from the door of the school all the way down to the van across the road, a dirty white van nonetheless. Kimberly either was in some sort of small belief that Ted was a family member, friend, or she knew she was in danger, putting her in shock and just hoping someone would help her. But once Kimberly was in the van, she was gone forever. Later, when questioned, a student would say that they saw a man fitting Ted's description standing around the gym. We don't know how long Ted had Kimberly. Did he kill her just in an hour or so, or did he keep her for a day or so? 2 months later, Kimberly would be found. She's found less than an hour away from her school. She was found in an abandoned, filthy hog shed. When they walk in and look at her body, it's believed that Ted had taken her life right in the hog shed. Because of how she looked, her body had decomposed dramatically. Bugs and small animals had already found their way to it, but she still had her shirt on. Her right arm was under her head, and her left was jammed under her body. Her legs were spread, no pants, and it looked like she had been killed while being assaulted. They could see where her neck was. There was still a huge amount of blood that had dried up, but visible. And what it looked like, Ted had used the giant knife on her throat while assaulting her. This would be the same knife he had bought the day before taking her. Kim's death was more than just a nightmare. It really has no words for the terror she went through. Days later, Ted is arrested. He had ditched the van at this point because he knew police were looking for it. Coincidentally, Ted had stolen an orange Volkswagen. He runs from the police and is pistol whipped. Inside the Volkswagen, on the passenger seat, on top of a half-eaten sandwich, they find the black glasses, the ones that a witness said a man was wearing when he took Kimberly. These glasses would be used in court in Kimberly's case. Ted's taken to the courthouse. His face is swollen, and he won't tell them who he is, but the police are pretty sure they know who he is. Ted was 31 years old right here. 31 when he killed Kimberly, his last victim. When Ted finally gets to the trial of Kimberly, after many delays, it would start on January 7th, 1980. This would be Ted's second trial. His past one, he was found guilty for the sorority murders that he had committed days earlier. Ted, once again, in the Kimberly Leach trial, tries to plead he's innocent. Just a mistake of identity. Wrong guy with bad police work. That's been done in this case. But at this point, Ted was in complete denial. Everyone knew him. He was quite famous at this point, and detectives were still questioning Ted and other murders in different states, and also Ted almost having a trial for the case of Karen Campbell that he took and killed, but it never happened. In the middle of the trial, Ted would ask his girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, to marry him. Ted not helping his situation, looking like a sane person. The court's mad, the judge is mad, and it's not a good look for Ted. He's not taking this serious. Kimberly's parents, Freda and Thomas, would take the stand to tell of the last time they saw their daughter that morning, what she was wearing, and what she was saying. At that moment, pieces of clothing that was found on Kimberly, on her decomposing body, were brought out and shown in the court, and the parents, in front of everyone, had to identify them as Kimberly's clothes. Ted is sitting back in his chair, looking off in the distance, and showing no interest in what's going on. The jury would also be shown crime scene photos that have still to this day never been released of Kimberly's body when it was found. It must have been unbelievable for Kimberly's parents to have to sit there and look at the man that they knew took their daughter and hearing what she had to go through in her last moments. Long story short, for the trial, Ted is found guilty once again. He's sentenced to death, and he famously stands up and tells the jury that they were wrong For whatever reason, there was something different about Kimberly with Ted. She wasn't just his last victim, but Ted wouldn't talk about her. Even when Ted was confessing to murders in his last days, he never talked about Kimberly. And the night before Ted was executed, when he gave his last famous interview, he was asked point blank about Kimberly. How could he take her and do what he did? You can see Ted in this moment, really the only time on tape, where Ted's admitted to the murder and saying he just doesn't want to talk about it, and it's far too much to go into. Whether it was so gruesome for Ted to think about, repulsive, finding somewhat of a feeling of remorse, or simply just embarrassed that he took a 12-year-old's life, Ted never talked about Kimberly, and we really don't know much about what happened in those hours that Ted had her, or really how long Ted did have her. In the end, Kimberly was Ted's last victim, but she wins because she took Ted's life too. Ted would be executed in the electric chair for the murder of Kimberly. Sadly for the Leach family, they never healed from their loss. Kim's father is said to have just worked himself to death in dying a young man. Kimberly's mother never really heals from what happened, not that she's supposed to. Kimberly's brother dies young as well, but in the end, they're all together, laying right beside the other one. Many people don't realize still to this day that Kimberly's death is still one of the most and sick, vicious murders recorded to this day, and it just happens to be by Ted Bundy.
I bear none of the guilt. I bear none of the responsibility. Because I did not kill Kimberly Leach.
Was apparently little Kimberly Leach, 12 years of age. I think the public outcry is greater there because an innocent child was taken from a playground. What did you feel after that? Were there the normal emotions 3 days later? Where were you, Ted?
I can't really talk about that right now. That's
too painful.
I would like to. I'd like to be able to convey to you what that experience is like, but I can't. I won't be able to talk about that.
Okay.